Although we Earth-dwellers are intrigued with the other entities in our universe, our main concerns are centered within our own planet, such as who makes the rules. Before the advent of the United States of America, the Church was the peak of hierarchical government. The United States broke away from theocratic rule and was the first nation to do so, by means of the First Amendment to our Constitution, which begins, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Are these two phrases contradictory? Is there an important purpose behind the inclusion of both no establishment of religion and no prohibiting the free exercise of religion? The seemingly contradictory provisions of our First Amendment have provided for all perspectives. By keeping government out of religion, we don't have one state religion, but more than 1,000 varieties of beliefs, as well as a variety of non-believers in this country, and in our schools. Food for Thought Productions is pleased to present this program addressing the issue of prayer in public schools and curriculum decisions. Harry Schwartzbart, president of the San Fernando Valley chapter of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, will introduce our speaker.
We all know that for a democratic form of government to succeed, it's imperative to have an active and an involved citizenry. We all know what happened in Vista, California, and what's happening on numerous school boards all over the country. Michael Shapiro is an outstanding example of an active, concerned citizen. Mike and I met on the telephone many times. I can't remember whether I called him or he called me first, but we were both fighting the same battle. And then some months ago, I attended a meeting of the Ventura County School Board. That turned out to be a rather contentious affair, and right in the middle of the controversy, I met for the first time in person Michael Shapiro. He's with us tonight, and he led a recall effort for two of the religious right members of the Ventura County School Board. Ventura County is an interesting location, and that's what we're going to hear about tonight. When Mike is not busy being an activist, he produces TV shows on significant issues that are of concern to all Americans. But tonight he's going to talk specifically about what's going on in Ventura County. Michael.
It actually started in my hometown of Ojai, and that experience thrust me into limelight that I never wanted to choose. Sort of involuntarily, I guess I had no choice once I got into it, once I was exposed to the political religious extremists of today, that I had no idea existed in Southern California, at least in Southern California within the hub of LA and LA County. You know, you think of this thing happening in Mississippi, in New Hampshire, or up in Montana with the freemen and the militias. You don't think of it happening right here, so close to a major cultural center and cultural mecca as Los Angeles and Los Angeles County. But before I get into that personal experience and the journey that I've taken from that experience many years ago, about 3 years ago to be exact, to this podium here tonight, I just want to digress for a moment and try to focus on what I call the macro view, the larger view, the national scope of the political religious extremists in our country today that are vying for power, because you have to understand on that level first, because that's where the instructions and the training and the demagoguery philosophy comes from. And it filters down through the hamlets and the villages and the counties and the school boards and the city councils and the supervisorial seats all across the nation from there, from on high. So we have to begin to understand this at that level first. And what better way to get an understanding of it than to cite something that I just received in the mail. And every time I give a talk like this, I'm able to say I just received something in the mail from Ralph Reed or Pat Robertson, because in fact, as a member of the Christian Coalition, which I am, strictly to get their communications, one has to join, of course, I'm getting a lot of mail. But Ralph Reed and Pat Robertson and their Christian Coalition are just but one of an entire plethora of political, religious, extremist organizations that are well-financed and doing similar work as they. Some of the others, you may have heard of them, There's Lou Sheldon's Traditional Values Coalition, Bob Simmons' Citizens for Excellence in Education, Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum, the Rutherford Institute, the Claremont Institute, many, many more, most of whom spring forth from a fundamentalist, evangelical, and theocratic mindset. In fact, many of these political, religious, extremist organizations and personalities have been working really for about 15 years now, quietly, organizing in the old-fashioned way, really. They've just out-hustled us all these years. What they have done should be applauded from the point of view of how they've succeeded, not on what their message is. I think that if one looked at the old technique that the Democratic Party apparatus used in the cities of Chicago and New York and the inner cities throughout our eastern seaboard, how do they organize coalitions of minorities and labor? This is what they're doing, but another sector of our population. They're doing it the old-fashioned way, precinct by precinct, telephoning, walking. So we have no one to blame really but ourselves that they are at this pinnacle of power, that they're at this epic stage in America where they can dictate exactly what perhaps the Republican National Convention's platform will actually turn out to be. They've done it the old-fashioned way with a lot of blood, salt, sweat, and hard work. And in that respect, they should be commended for such a job. This movement, though, is very, very frightening. This movement is out to do one thing. Obviously, it's a very narrow interpretation of what Christianity stands for, but what they want to do is unite their interpretation, their narrow interpretation of Christianity, with state power. And they want to back up, and they do back up their vision with millions of dollars, utilizing a vast array of newsletters, books, magazines, radio, and televangelistic programming on TV, all working together to fulfill a common objective. It cannot be denied if you look at their literature and read it carefully. They want to rule this nation completely. They want to control each and every aspect of society, from common culture and education to the very civil and criminal code of laws that bind this nation together. So I got a call, anonymously got a call, from someone who had, on good advice, that the coming Tuesday school board of the Ojai Unified School District was going to have a band of religious zealots storm the meeting. And without being on the agenda that night, we're going to demand that the high school English state-approved high school English anthology textbook be banned from the high school. And I laughed. Again, I said, well, come on, this is Ojai. Ojai is a small town, but it's known for its progressive thought and its ecumenical way of dealing with issues of all kinds, socially, politically, issues of faith. This couldn't be. Are you serious? Absolutely. I have it on record that it's going to happen. I can't tell you who told me this, but I know the school board is very concerned. We're trying to round up citizens who might be there to speak out in opposition to such an event taking place. Of course, I said, I'll be there. I'll try to make a few phone calls, and I'll be there, period. Tuesday came. I got there 15 minutes before, and you have to know this is a room, the school board meeting room in Ojai is much smaller than this room. On average, the meetings take about 20 minutes. Usually they have 5 people that show up. Maybe if there's a hot issue, 15. This night, there was not even room for me to get inside the door. I somehow just pushed my way, wedged my way through. And there were hundreds of people there carrying the Bible in one hand, and this is not to denigrate their faith, by the way, in any way whatsoever. I never do that to anyone of any stripe. They're entitled to that faith and their belief in every way, as long as it doesn't go and spill over into the public domain, in my opinion. But they had the Bible in one hand, Xerox copies of the offending passages from the high school English anthology in the other. And they were one at a time going up to the podium, speaking in the most hostile, threatening way, pointing to each of the 5 members of the school board, telling them that if they allowed this textbook to remain, they were guilty of sexual harassment. They were guilty of endangering the morals of minors. They were guilty of promoting pornography in their schools. And if they didn't cease and desist and get that book out, they were going to go down to Bradbury, the Ventura County District Attorney, and press charges, criminal charges, of all those things that I just mentioned, if they didn't ban that book. few of us stood up, and I got to say, it was my first experience of this kind of arena, and it was frightening because there was a lot of anger and hate in this room. You felt it. It was very palpable. And I tried to speak about the meaning of censorship from a point of view of law and what this school board had to take into consideration. I had done a little homework that day. I called, and I didn't know Harry at the time. You would have done very well for me that day, I'm sure, Harry. But I was a member of People for the American Way, and they have a legal department, as does Americans United. And they gave me the definition of what constitutes a censorship attempt in a forum such as a public unified school board. And in fact, if this school board had acquiesced and decided to censor and ban this textbook, as was the cry by this religious political extremist group, they would have been guilty of a censorship attempt. It would have violated all kinds of codes of not only the California Constitution, but the United States Constitution as well, and many laws in between. We had a few other speakers come up, but it was so crazy that night. The people were getting up demanding, doesn't this school board, and after I spoke, doesn't Mr. Shapiro realize that this nation is a Christian nation, that it's supposed to promote the Christian worldview to our children? One after another along those lines. Fortunately, the school board had some sense. They said, we're not going to accomplish anything tonight like this. Let's have a civil meeting of the minds. We will schedule this on the agenda, the only thing on the agenda, next week, same time. Let's have 25 people speak in favor of the elimination of this book. Let's have 25 people come and speak to keep this book. And in fact, that's what happened. A week later, we had 25 scholars, clergymen, mainstream Christian clergymen, publishers, authors, teachers, and students. By the way, this textbook was a rich example of the English word in our nation and in Britain as well. It had everything from Chaucer to Hemingway to Dreiser to Maya Angelou it was incredible. I mean, a rich collection. And after speaking with the faculty who used this book in the English literature class, we understood, like in most schools, if a child was given an assignment, they would read it. And if there was something controversial, believe me, this was very deeply talked about and studied in class in an open forum discussion. So these children understood the meaning of whatever it was the characters in the short story or in the novella were trying to communicate. But this wasn't good enough for the other side. They basically repeated their threats to the school board. And fortunately, the school board was sensible and courageous, really, to say that unanimously this textbook was going to remain. You have to also realize that the state law, Ed Code in California, says that any assignment or textbook from any grade up from first grade to high school graduation that is found objectionable by a student and or a parent on the basis of their faith or their cultural background, all they need to do is contact the teacher or the principal, and alternative assignments will be given, no questions asked, no ostracism by their colleagues in the school. So no one's forced to have this textbook. And the other side knew this, but it didn't matter. To them, it was an example of paganism, and they said that. It was an example of the divisiveness and evil doings of secular humanists, and they said that. And it was an example of the leftist liberals from the Department of Education in Sacramento, and they said that. When I said in a letter to the editor, no, actually it was an op-ed piece, that it was unfortunate that many members of the political religious extreme wing of the body politic campaign on one issue, an issue that the vast array of the public can support, but when they get into office, they have another agenda. I said, shouldn't they be responsible to their constituents? And I recall that Wendy Larner, who, as it turned out, became the president of the Ventura County School Board, responded and said, isn't it a shame that Mr. Shapiro does not acknowledge that, in fact, one's accountability and one's biggest constituent is the Lord? So this is how she looked at the situation in terms of politics and one's responsibility to the constituency. Well, there it was. Wendy Larner was now the head of the Ventura County School Board. And I began to hear things going on down there. And I said, well, if it's anything like Ojai, I'm going. I want to find out what they're doing. And it turns out, as soon as they had a majority, a 3-2 majority, they went to town. The first thing that they did, illegally, because they really didn't have the authority to do so, is to ban Planned Parenthood and AIDS Care of Ventura from conducting teacher workshops within the Unified School District. Now, I'm not talking about Planned Parenthood or AIDS Care of Ventura talking to students. I'm talking about the teacher workshops. These are workshops that teachers have available to them throughout any school year in order to advance techniques of imparting knowledge, whether it's a new math, phonics, history, social sciences, sex ed, whatever it is. But no, Wendy Larner and her religious, political, extremist majority was not going to allow Planned Parenthood and AIDS Care of Ventura from further conducting teacher workshops. Why? Well, you know, Planned Parenthood, they claim, is promoting abortion and teaching abortion to school children. I don't know if that's the case. I don't think it is, and I've studied it pretty carefully. As far as AIDS Care of Ventura, well, we intercepted a letter that Wendy Larner, on behalf of the school board, because she signed it on school board stationery, president of the school board, wrote to Governor Wilson, saying that, "Dear Governor, it has come to my attention that the homosexual lobby in this state is diverting funds, taxpayers' public funds from Sacramento in order to promote the homosexual lifestyle to our school children throughout the school districts of the state of California." And when we started to mount a recall of her, she said, "And I have no doubt that those funds are also being utilized possibly to aid my recall." Of course, it was a ridiculous charge. But she believes it. That's the point. They believe that that's what was happening. Why? Because Lou Sheldon, Reverend Lou Sheldon, who in fact was a guest lecturer and sermoner at one of the evangelical churches in Ventura when this recall campaign was going on, he espouses the same views. He has said publicly that the so-called homosexual lobby has a direct line into the Oval Office, and that President Clinton and Hillary Clinton themselves are aiding and abetting the dissemination of a gay homosexual lifestyle throughout the nation. It's ridiculous. But people who don't know any better will believe it, and they get very frightened at the prospect of such a thing ever being remotely true. This whole thing about stealth campaigns, again, I think today we're more sophisticated. We have voter forums where we're able to smoke out the candidate and ask them the right questions. And I think in Ventura County that will always be the case. But up until recently, these candidates of political religious extremist bent ran on a stealth campaign. And as far as Ralph Reed is concerned, there's nothing wrong with it. When he was asked about the ethical nature and the fairness of stealth campaigning, he defended it. He said that there's nothing wrong with Christian coalition candidates who run on issues like taxes or crime and reveal later the causes most important to them, like anti-abortion, against gay rights, or for creationism, only upon assuming office. He said, because, politics is like guerrilla warfare, he said. If you reveal your location, all it does is allow your opponent to improve his artillery range. It's better to move quietly, Reed said, with stealth, under cover at night. I don't know about you, but that kind of makes the neck hairs behind my back stand up. So what we're talking about here really is politics and theology. It's not Americans for separation of church and state. It's Americans for the combining and commingling and interrelating completely of church and state. That is the premise of the radical religious right. And that's what they're presenting, and it's nothing new. They've been doing it for a long time, and many of the more radical fringes can actually point to chapters in the Bible to justify not only their belief, but their actions. In the same way that the Freemen in Montana can do it, or the Posse Comitatus, or the Order, or any of the radical militias that are out there today. Maybe that is indeed a fringe, and I'm not comparing the Christian coalition to the Order or the Freemen. But they are both guilty of the same thing, that is, having a narrow interpretation or using their spin on what the Bible means to them here on earth today. In one of the articles, scholarly articles about the growth and birth of the religious right movement in this country, I learned that one of their texts, the principal text upon which the radical religious right justify their action, is Matthew 11:12. It says, "From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force." They feel that they are God's servants, that this nation is God's dominion. Both were created by God, and the earth was created first, and they were put here, created by God, to take the earth and reap the harvest from the earth, and nothing should stand in their way to accomplish that. So when Wendy Larner and her religious right majority of the Ventura County School Board sought legal justification, because there has to be some of that, I don't think any politician is still going to get away today with citing the Bible for justifying a political edict yet. We haven't come to that yet, Harry, but we might be getting closer to it, but we haven't come to it yet. So they decided to seek the Rutherford Institute's legal opinion to justify their actions on banning AIDS Care Ventura and Planned Parenthood. What is the Rutherford Institute? It was formed many years ago. It was a radical right-wing alternative to the ACLU. As a matter of fact, the Rutherford Institute, in their preamble, in their mission statement, it says, the Rutherford Institute promotes a Christian radical right agenda utilizing the courts of America. Quote, the Christian community must assert the priority of God's law word as binding on all aspects of life, including church, state, and school, that Christians must once again take over government in education, welfare, health, and other spheres. He said, finally, quote, it is more than a jurisdictional dispute today. It is a religious conflict and a war unto death. These voices and language from the Rutherford Institute, the group that the religious right majority of the Ventura County School Board solicited for a legal opinion to justify their acts. I don't know about you, but I take to the old adage that if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, and if it looks like a duck, well, you know the rest. So regarding the language and the spoken agenda of the political religious extremists of today, do they want a theocracy or not? I hear a lot of quacking when I ask that question. But you know, when you point the finger at them at a talk show, a radio call-in show, they say, oh my God, we don't want a theocracy. Oh, they are shocked when charged with attempting to create a theocracy in America. They say, oh my God, how can you say that? You're twisting what we're saying. Thank goodness there's an abundant public record that acknowledges that, in fact, theocracy is exactly what they're after. Again, at the Christian Coalition Convention, Reed said, quote, I take issue with those who suggest that religion and politics don't mix. After all, we don't have to pretend to be mainstream. We are mainstream. And in a Christian Coalition video called America at the Crossroads, Reed and Pat Robertson succinctly outline their purpose and agenda. On the video, Robertson first says, quote, Christians founded this nation, they built this nation, and for 300 years they governed this nation. We can govern again. That's why I founded the Christian Coalition. And later in the same video, he goes on to state, the mission of the Christian Coalition is simple, to mobilize Christians one precinct at a time, one community at a time, one state at a time, till once again we are at the head and not the tail, and at the top and not the bottom of our political system. And a look at a publication titled, How to Elect Christians to Public Office, put out by Citizens for Excellence in Education. By the way, very well-funded group with something like 45,000 chapters throughout America. The #1 political religious extremist organization battling for the soul and conscience of school boards across America today. This is what their introduction to the pamphlet says. It says, quote, this is written by Bob Simmons. He says, not a single policy on a school board or a city council law or a state or federal statute is passed that is not a moral decision. The Christian religion, the Bible, is the basis for all morality, right and wrong. Yet the church has laid down its biblical mandate to impact and transform society. Salt does little good on the shelf in the church until it is used, he says. So he says, with good men, the righteous in authority, the people rejoice, but with the wicked in power, they groan. That's from Proverbs 29:2. He says, America is now groaning. Atheistic, secular humanists should be removed from office, and Christians should be elected. We can then all rejoice continually as our children and our nation will be made more safe. And finally, he says, in the first chapter leading up to how to organize to take over the school board in your neighborhood, he says, all citizens should elect someone who represents their philosophy on vital issues, and only Christians can truly represent the Judeo-Christian views. Therefore, Christians should elect godly Christians whenever possible. The church would then be holding up God's standard in society, And when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. That's Isaiah 59:19. He says, finally, the Bible is God's standard. We are his standard bearers through the Spirit of the Lord. This is the Bible of how to elect Christians to higher office. And of course, we're not talking about Christians per se. We're talking about political, religious extremists. And I guess if you substituted Christians for Farrakhan's Nation of Islam, or some of the radical Jewish organizations in Israel and in the Lower East Side of New York who were responsible, at least their views, were responsible for the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, they're all the same. We're not a Christian nation. We're a nation of laws that protect every religious faith and no faith. Every religious faith and no faith. And every private, personal conviction in between. That's what we're a nation of. Simply stated, the other side has out-hustled us, but it's not too late. I'd just like to end by reminding you what Reverend Martin Niemöller said way back in 1937, July 1st, when the knock on the door came and the Gestapo was there to finally take him away. He said, he wrote actually, while in prison in custody, that in Germany they came first for the communists, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Catholic. Then they came for me, but by that time, there was no one left to speak up. Thank you.
To recap Mr. Shapiro's key points, the religious right invests considerable resources into controlling education, which, after all, is what determines our future. Electing stealth candidates to school boards is one of their primary strategies, so it's important to check out candidates before you vote. Monitor your local school board meetings and make sure your opinions and wishes are known. Develop positive candidates for office. Local offices, such as school boards, provide an excellent grassroots training base for higher office. And most important, when desirable candidates are running, vote.
We hope you have found this program intellectually stimulating and that you will continue to investigate the ideas raised here. To connect with other like-minded individuals, please contact any of the dozens of free thought organizations, such as the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Center for Inquiry, and Atheists United. You may also email the producer directly via leebaker27@gmail.com. This program has been distributed through the courtesy of Atheists United.